I found the film reel on a Tuesday afternoon. The attic had been silent for years, collecting dust and forgotten memories. I was up there sorting through old boxes when my foot nudged something. A small metal canister, cold, almost unnaturally so, rolled out from behind an old chest. It clinked against the wooden floor, stopping just short of my fingers. I picked it up. No label, just a dull, metallic surface worn with time. I should have left it there. Instead, I turned it over in my hands. A flicker of unease curled at the edge of my mind, but curiosity won. The attic smelled of mildew and neglect, but now there was something else. A faint, acrid scent, like burnt chemicals. I brought the reel downstairs, clearing space in my darkroom. My old projector sat in the corner, draped in a thin layer of dust. It had been years since I developed film manually, but something about this reel made me want to see it immediately. Maybe it was the way it felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the silence in the attic, pressing against my ribs like a held breath. I threaded the film carefully. My fingers trembled as I turned on the projector. The whirring sound filled the room, followed by a flickering light on the wall. The first few frames were blurry, distorted, static on an old television. Then an image sharpened. A street corner. Familiar. Just a few blocks from my apartment, a man stood under a street lamp smoking a cigarette. His face was obscured, but something about his posture seemed wrong. The next frame jumped. The man was on the ground, his body twisted unnaturally, a dark stain spreading beneath him. I swallowed. The reel continued. Another location, a woman this time, standing by a riverbank. Her eyes stared directly at the camera. The next frame, her body floating in the water, arms outstretched, her mouth open in a silent scream. Frame after frame, crime after crime. My breath came shallow. The murders looked fresh, recent. I reached for my phone, fingers fumbling. I had to check the news, call someone. But just as I was about to stop the reel, the final frame appeared, and my stomach turned to ice. It was me. Not just a reflection, not just a trick of the light. It was me holding my camera, staring into the lens. But my expression was different, cold, detached, almost hungry. My hands gripped the camera too tightly. My eyes, they weren't mine. The reel clicked, the projector fell silent. For a moment I sat frozen. The after image burned into my vision, my own face looking back at me like a stranger. Then the doorbell rang. I jolted, knocking over the projector. My hands were shaking as I moved toward the door, heart hammering in my chest. Peering through the peephole, I saw two figures standing in the dim light. Police officers. I opened the door, my voice unsteady. "Can I help you?" One of the officers, a woman with sharp eyes, tilted her head. "Are you Nathan Carter?" I nodded. "There's been an incident." She hesitated. "A body was found in your backyard." The room swayed. My throat went dry. "Number, that wasn't possible. We need you to come with us," the second officer said. I glanced at my hands. My fingertips were smeared with something dark. Not ink, not dust, blood. And then from the dark room behind me, the projector clicked back on. The reel had restarted. Only now the images were changing, frame by frame, moving closer. The world narrowed to a single thought. I had to see the backyard. The officers were speaking, their voices distant, muffled, but my pulse pounded too loudly for their words to register. My body moved on its own, one step, then another, drawn by something deeper than fear. I turned toward the back door. "Mr. Carter," the female officer stepped forward, blocking my path. Her badge caught the dim light of the hallway. "We need you to stay inside while we assess the scene." My mouth was dry. What did you find?" A hesitation, a glance between them. The male officer, taller and built like he'd seen too many crime scenes to be fazed by anything, cleared his throat. "A man, no ID on him. But there was something else." The hesitation stretched, wrapping around my ribs like a slow, crushing weight. "The body was posed," he continued, "like a photograph, head tilted just so, arms arranged." He exhaled sharply. "And there was a camera." My breath hitched. "What?" The officer nodded toward my hands. And your fingerprints are all over it. I stepped back, my mind spiraling. No. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. I didn't, my voice cracked. We're not accusing you, the female officer said. But we need answers. Do you recognize the man? I tried to swallow the panic threatening to choke me. My gaze flickered toward the backyard window, but the blinds were drawn. I needed to see him. I started, but then a sound stopped me cold. From the dark room, the projector, the whirring, the clicking, the faint hum of the reel spinning. I had turned it off, I was sure of it, but now in the silence, it was playing again. The officers noticed the change in my expression. What is that? I didn't answer. My feet moved first. Back through the dim hallway, past the kitchen, toward the room that now felt foreign, sinister. The officers followed. The dark room glowed with flickering light. Shadows danced against the walls as the film played. But something was wrong. The images had changed. Frame after frame, the backyard, the grass damp with fresh earth, a shape sprawled in the dirt, motionless. I stepped closer. The body, the same one the officers had just described. His arms positioned, his head tilted slightly, just like a portrait. The frame jumped. A new image. Closer now. My camera. Sitting in the grass beside him, lens pointed at the corpse. Another frame. And then I saw myself. Not in the background. Not a reflection. No, I was in the frame, standing over the body, holding the camera. The projector clicked to the next frame. My head snapped toward the officers, but they weren't looking at the screen anymore. They were looking at me. Their hands hovered over their holsters, eyes unreadable. The male officer's voice was firm, controlled. Mr. Carter, we need you to step away from the projector. I raised my hands slowly, my breath uneven. I didn't take these. Silence. The images kept changing, the reel pulling them forward, forcing the truth into the open. Another frame. Closer. The body was clearer now. I could see his face, slack, empty. A face I knew. A face I had seen just hours ago. The man from the first frame. The man standing under the street lamp. The man who had already been dead when I found the reel. I stumbled back, knocking over a table of chemicals. The female officer flinched, her hand tightening on her belt. Stay where you are. I don't... My voice was barely there. I don't know what's happening. The projector whirred on, frame after frame, relentless. And then it stopped. One last image. Not the body, not the backyard. Me, again. Only this time, I wasn't holding the camera. I was looking directly into the lens, my expression blank, eyes dark, and behind me, just barely visible, someone else, standing in the shadows, watching. A hand reached into the frame, resting on my shoulder. A hand that wasn't mine. The projector shut off with a final echoing click. Silence swallowed the room. The officers stared, unreadable. My breath came fast, unsteady. And then, from outside, a voice, low, familiar, calling my name. The voice froze me in place. It came from outside, somewhere near the backyard. Faint, distant, yet unmistakably familiar. Nathan. The officers heard it too. Their heads snapped toward the window, hands tightening over their holsters. The female officer moved first, stepping past me toward the back door. The male officer hesitated, eyes flicking between me and the projector, as if he wasn't sure which was more dangerous. The voice called again, a slow, deliberate whisper. Nathan. The hairs on my arms rose. My mind screamed at me to stay inside, to let the officers handle it, to deny the possibility of what I had just seen on the projector. But my feet moved anyway, following the officer toward the back door. The backyard was still. The air felt too heavy, too thick, as if something unseen pressed against my skin. The grass was damp, the scent of earth and something metallic lingering in the air. And then I saw him, the body, right where the projector had shown it. The male officer cursed under his breath, stepping past me to get a better look. The female officer reached for her radio, voice steady but clipped. Dispatch, we have a confirmed DB. Requesting backup and forensics at... She stopped. The body moved. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my throat. The man's limbs, stiff and awkward, twitched. His fingers curled slightly, his head lolled to the side. And then, impossibly, he sat up. His eyes were empty, glazed over, but his mouth formed words. A rasping breath, dry and broken. "You forgot something, Nathan?" The officers reacted instantly, drawing their weapons. "Sir, don't move!" But I couldn't look away. His face was slack, wrong, as if the skin didn't quite fit, like a mask stretched too tightly. His head tilted, movements jerky, unnatural. Then slowly, he lifted a hand and pointed. At me. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't move. "I don't," my voice barely came out. "I don't know you." His lips cracked into something like a smile. His teeth were too white, too clean against the dark, sunken hollows of his face. "Yes, you do." And then the air shifted. A pressure, sudden and crushing, filled the space between us. The officers shouted something, but their voices were far away, distorted. The world tilted. My vision blurred. The man lunged. A gunshot rang out. Then another. A sharp, deafening sound that split the night apart. The man's body jerked, his head snapping back. For a second, everything froze. The wind stilled. The trees stopped swaying. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Then he collapsed. This time, he didn't move. The officers were at my side in an instant, their voices firm, grounding. The female officer checked for a pulse, her jaw tightening. "Dead, again!" The male officer exhaled sharply, radioing for immediate backup. I stared at the body, my mind screaming at me to make sense of what just happened. "You saw that, right?" My voice was barely there. "He was already..." The female officer stood, her expression unreadable. "We need to get inside, now." I nodded, but something stopped me. A glint of silver in the dead man's hand. A camera lens. I bent down before I could think better of it, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. The moment I touched it, a static jolt ran up my arm. And then, for the briefest second, the world wasn't the backyard anymore. I saw a dark room. I saw myself, standing in front of a mirror, my camera raised, my expression blank, my hands steady. Behind me in the reflection, someone stood in the shadows, watching. The vision snapped away, leaving me breathless. I staggered back, the lens slipping from my grip. The female officer grabbed my arm. "Inside, now." I didn't argue. As we stepped back into the house, the male officer locked the door behind us. The radio crackled with static, voices coming through in fragmented bursts. Backup was on the way, but something told me they were already too late, because as I turned toward the dark room, the projector was running again. And this time, the images weren't just playing. They were changing, frame by frame, second by second. A hand reaching for a doorknob, a shadow moving inside the house, and the last image, me, standing exactly where I was now, but with someone behind me, close enough to touch. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. The officers reacted instantly, drawing their weapons, scanning the dimly lit room. But there was nothing, no one, just the dark room, the hum of the projector, and the flickering images that now felt more like warnings than memories. The female officer's voice was sharp. "Nathan, what did you see?" I struggled to find the words. My breathing was uneven, my chest tight. "There was someone behind me. I saw it on the film." The male officer cursed under his breath. "This isn't possible." The radio crackled again. More voices. Static. A confirmation that backup was en route. The female officer lowered her gun slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on me. "We need to go frame by frame." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to shut it off, burn the film, run. But something deeper, something colder, told me that wouldn't matter. The film would keep playing. I stepped forward, hesitating just long enough for doubt to settle in, then adjusted the reel. The frames slowed, flickering one at a time. First the backyard, the body, the officer standing over it. Click. The man sitting up, his mouth forming words. Click. The gunshot. The moment he collapsed. Click. Then the images shifted. The house, the hallway, the dark room. Click. Me, standing in the exact spot I was in now. Click. The shadow behind me. I swallowed hard and inched forward, adjusting the reel even slower this time. The next frame would reveal more. A face, a movement, something to tell me who or what was in that room with me. Click. A hand. Not mine. Not either of the officers. Long fingers, pale, resting just above my shoulder. Almost gentle. Click. A sliver of a face, half hidden in the shadows. A mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Click. A full image now. The man in the frame was wearing my face. I stumbled back, knocking into the table. The officers exchanged glances, confused, but I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because the man wasn't just wearing my face. He was me, not similar, not a twin. It was my reflection, staring back through the film, but wrong. Cold, empty. The female officer took a step forward. "Nathan, what is it?" I couldn't answer, because the film was still moving. Click. The shadowed version of me tilted his head, studying the camera. Click. His lips moved. Click. 2 words formed on the screen. Turn around. The room dropped into dead silence. I felt the weight of it, the pressure of something unseen, something just beyond my vision. My skin prickled, my heart hammering so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. The officers were watching me carefully now, guns still drawn, ready for something I wasn't sure they could fight. "Nathan," the male officer said, voice low. "What does it say?" I didn't answer, because I could feel it. Someone behind me, standing close. The air was colder, heavier. A breath ghosted against the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting every instinct to run. And then I did the one thing I knew I shouldn't. I turned around, and I saw myself. Not a reflection, not a trick of the film. He was there, inches away. His expression was unreadable, his head tilted in the same curious way I had seen in the film. Then he smiled, and the lights went out. The darkness swallowed everything. Not just the absence of light, but something deeper, heavier, like the entire house had been pulled into a void. I couldn't see the officers. I couldn't even see my own hands. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing in from all sides. And then, in the blackness, a whisper. "You forgot something." The voice wasn't mine, but it came from my mouth. Panic surged through me, cold and electric. I stumbled backward, my breath coming fast and uneven. My shoulder struck the edge of the projector, sending it toppling over. The reel hit the floor, unspooling in long, tangled strips. Movement, a shift in the dark. Then, fingers, brushing against my arm. I gasped and lurched away, my hands scrambling for anything solid. The table, a chair, something to anchor me. A gunshot split the air, sharp and deafening. Then another. Muzzle flashes lit the room in stuttering bursts. The first revealed the officers, their faces tense, weapons aimed. The second showed something else, a shape, standing where I had just been, watching me. Then the darkness swallowed us again. The female officer's voice was sharp. "Nathan, stay where you are." My voice shook. "I don't know what's happening." A third gunshot, then a crash, wood splintering, glass shattering, and suddenly the lights flickered back on. Everything was exactly as it had been. The overturned projector, the unspooled film, the darkroom door hanging open. Except now I was alone. The officers were gone. I turned in a slow circle, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "Hello?" Silence. The air still carried the scent of gunpowder, of something burnt and acrid. My ears rang from the shots, but beneath the hum, I heard something else. A faint click. From the corner of the room, my camera. The lens was facing me, the shutter still smoking slightly, as if it had just been used. And on the table beside it, a freshly developed photograph. My fingers shook as I reached for it. I didn't want to look. I looked. It was a picture of me, but not just me. I was standing in the dark room, in the exact position I was now. My expression was empty, my hands limp at my sides, and behind me, the officers, lying on the floor, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. Dead. My stomach twisted violently. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over another stack of film canisters. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The house was silent. Too silent. I needed to get out. I grabbed my camera without thinking, my fingers still smeared with drying blood, and bolted toward the door. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, the shadows reaching for me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Then I heard it, the faint mechanical whirring of the projector. Running again. No, I had knocked it over. It should have been broken. But when I turned back, the film was rolling, frame after frame, showing something new. A door, opening, someone stepping inside. Me, walking out of the house. Only it wasn't me. Because as I watched, the other version of myself turned toward the camera, and he was smiling. I couldn't move. The film played on the broken projector, flickering across the dark room wall. My body, or something wearing it, stepped through the front door in slow, deliberate strides. The way it moved was all wrong. Too smooth, too calculated. And then, in the next frame, it stopped. The other me turned, staring directly into the camera. His expression was empty, except for the smile. It wasn't forced or unnatural, but it didn't belong on my face. It was too knowing, too patient. Then he lifted his hand and waved. A cold sweat broke across my skin. My pulse throbbed in my ears, and I felt my knees threaten to give out. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. But outside, I heard footsteps on the pavement. I stumbled to the window, my breath coming in short gasps. The street outside was drenched in the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. And there, walking away from my house, was him. Me. He wore my jacket, carried my camera slung over one shoulder. He walked with my exact gait, like he had studied every inch of me, and no one noticed. A woman passed him on the sidewalk, her head down as she scrolled through her phone. A car slowed at the intersection, headlights sweeping across him before continuing as if nothing was wrong. As if he belonged there. I wanted to scream, to run outside and stop him, but my legs wouldn't move. My hands gripped the edge of the window frame too tightly, my nails digging into the wood. Then, as if he heard my thoughts, he stopped, turned, and looked up at me. The world tilted. I stepped back, heart slamming against my ribs. But even with the distance between us, I could feel him smiling. Then he raised his camera and took a picture. The flash exploded against the darkness. My vision blurred with the burst of light, my body recoiling instinctively. When I blinked it away, he was gone. I turned, stumbling back into the darkroom, gasping for breath. The projector was still rolling, the images continuing as if mocking me. Click. He was inside a bar now, laughing with strangers. My face, my voice. Click. Standing in front of my office downtown, waving at my coworkers as if nothing had changed. Click. At my favorite coffee shop, ordering exactly what I always did. Click. Inside someone's house. The last frame froze there. A dimly lit room. A woman sitting on the couch, her back turned to the camera. She didn't know he was there. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The officers were gone. My house was empty. And outside, I was living a life that no longer belonged to me. Then the screen flickered. The image changed. I wasn't looking at the other me anymore. I was looking at myself. Not a reflection. Not a film still. Just me, standing in the darkroom. And behind me, the door creaked open. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I turned and saw nothing. The hallway was empty, but I could feel someone there. The air was thick, pressing down on my skin like unseen hands. A whisper, barely audible. "You forgot something." I took a step back. My heel struck something on the floor. The fallen film reel, unspooled across the hardwood. My own face stared up from the tangled frames, frozen in black and white. Then the whisper came again, right next to my ear. "This time, don't forget." The lights cut out. The darkness swallowed everything. I reached for the wall, fingers scraping against peeling paint, but the world around me felt wrong, stretched too thin. The air was heavy, pressing against my chest like I had been buried alive. Somewhere in the house, the projector clicked off. The silence was worse than the sound. Then a breath. Close. Too close. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just the dark, pulsing like a living thing. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. But when I lifted the screen to use the flashlight, it showed something else. Not my reflection. His, the other me, smiling. My fingers slackened, and the phone slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The screen shattered, but the image remained. My face, his face, watching, waiting. Then the whisper came again, curling around me like smoke. It's time. A cold hand closed over my wrist. I yanked back, stumbling, but the grip tightened. Something was behind me, not just watching anymore. Here, touching me. I gasped for air, my vision tunneling. The walls of the dark room pulsed, the shadows shifting. Then I saw it. The film reel, unspooled across the floor, twisting and writhing like it was alive. The frames flickered in the dim light, changing. The woman on the couch, the house, the moment before she turned. Then a new image, a man standing behind her. No, not a man, me, holding the camera. I lurched back, my body cold, but the frame flickered again. The woman turning, her eyes widening in fear. Click. The next frame was red, a smear of motion, a blurred hand. Click. The body slumped forward. Click. My hands stained with blood. Click. My face, smiling. I stumbled away from the reel, bile rising in my throat. No, I whispered. That's not me. But I knew it was. The film didn't lie. A door creaked open somewhere in the house. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I ran, out of the dark room, down the hall. The air felt thick, each breath harder than the last. I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock, but my fingers felt numb, disconnected. The knob wouldn't turn. Then I saw the camera, sitting on the entryway table, waiting. I hesitated, pulse hammering. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't in my ear. It was coming from inside me. You forgot something. My head snapped toward the mirror hanging by the door, and there he was, my reflection. But I wasn't moving. He was. I watched, frozen, as the other me tilted his head, studying me through the glass. His expression was unreadable, except for the smile, that knowing, patient smile. Then he lifted his camera. I felt the weight of something in my hands. I looked down. The camera strap was slung around my neck. My fingers curled around the body of the camera. My grip steady, like it had always been there, like it had always belonged to me. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection wasn't smiling anymore. It was waiting. The door behind me clicked unlocked. I turned slowly and stepped outside. The air was cool, the streetlights buzzing faintly. The city moved on unaware. I lifted the camera. A woman walked by, her face half lit by the neon glow of a shop window. I adjusted the focus, framed the shot. She turned toward me, her eyes widening in confusion. I smiled and pressed the shutter. Click. My name is Elliot Grayson, and I draw the dead. Not intentionally, of course. I'm a forensic sketch artist for the NYPD, tasked with turning vague descriptions into faces that might bring criminals to justice. I've spent years in this job, watching the haunted eyes of victims' families light up with recognition or darken with grief when they see the sketches I produce. But nothing prepared me for the night I received the first request. It came in the form of a simple, unmarked envelope slipped under the door of my apartment. I nearly tossed it in the trash, thinking it was junk mail, but the weight of it felt off. Thick paper, high quality, almost personal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just one instruction. Draw this face. No name, no return address. Just a photograph of a man in his late 30s with sharp cheekbones and tired eyes. Something about his face unsettled me. He looked familiar, yet I couldn't place him. I figured it was some sort of prank, maybe an amateur detective hoping to confirm a missing person. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I sat at my desk and did what I did best. I sketched. Line by line, the man's face emerged on paper, as vivid and lifelike as if he were sitting across from me. The next morning, I found his face again, on the news. Man found murdered in abandoned warehouse. It was him, the same face I had drawn, same sunken eyes, same scar along the jawline. For a moment, I convinced myself it was a coincidence, just dumb luck. But then came the second envelope, and the third. Each time, a new face, a new stranger, and each time, within days, they were dead. I should have gone to the police, I wanted to, but how could I explain it? Hi, I've been drawing murder victims before they die, but I swear I'm not involved. That would get me locked up in a padded room not taken seriously. So I did the only thing that made sense. I stopped. I ignored the next envelope when it arrived, left it unopened on my desk. Days passed. No new sketches, no new deaths. I convinced myself that I had broken the pattern. Then last night, the final request arrived. I knew it before I even opened the envelope. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the thick sheet of paper, my stomach twisting in knots. Draw your own face. My breath hitched. My mouth went dry. This was impossible. I stood in front of my mirror, staring at my own reflection as if I were seeing myself for the first time. I ran my fingers over my cheekbones, my brow, my lips. I wasn't famous. I wasn't important. Why me? I told myself not to do it. I could throw the paper away, burn it, ignore it, but something inside me, the same instinct that had driven me to draw every other face, compelled me forward. My hands moved on their own, shading, outlining, bringing myself to life in graphite and ink. When I was done, I could barely breathe. The sketch was perfect, too perfect. I had drawn hundreds, maybe thousands of faces in my career. None had ever looked this final. I barely slept that night. I kept the sketch on my desk, folded and hidden beneath a stack of papers, as if not looking at it would make it less real. Then morning came, and my world shattered. The newspaper was waiting on my doorstep, as always. But when I unfolded it, my vision blurred. My pulse thundered in my ears. Front page, bold headline, unidentified body found. And beneath it, my sketch, my face. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling against the cold glass screen. I dialed 911, hesitated, hung up. What would I even say? Hi, I think I'm dead but also still alive. My phone vibrated in my palm, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I had to. I pressed the phone to my ear. My voice came out as a whisper. Hello? Silence. Then a slow, deliberate breath. A voice I didn't recognize, smooth, measured, almost amused. You forgot one detail. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. Who is this? No response. Just the faintest rustling sound, like someone moving just beyond my line of sight. I turned, my gaze landing on the mirror across the room. And that's when I saw it. My reflection wasn't quite right. The eyes, they weren't mine. They belonged to the face I had drawn. And then, the reflection blinked. I didn't. The line went dead. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the wooden floor, the sound sharp in the silence. My breath came in shallow gasps as I staggered backward, away from the mirror. My own reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't me. Not really, the eyes were wrong. They weren't just different in shape or color. They held something else, an awareness, a presence that didn't belong. My reflection was watching me, studying me, waiting. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe stress. Maybe I had finally lost my mind. But I needed to prove it to myself, to test if what I was seeing was real or just some sick trick of the brain. I raised my right hand. The reflection did the same. I lifted my chin. It followed. I exhaled, forcing myself to calm down. It was fine. It was just my mind playing tricks. I reached for the mirror, fingertips hovering just above the cool glass. My reflection did the same. Then, just as my hand made contact, it smiled. I didn't. A slow, deliberate grin stretched across its face, teeth bared in a way that felt almost animalistic. A shudder ripped through me and I stumbled back, knocking into the edge of my desk. My chair scraped against the floor, the sudden noise making me flinch. My reflection remained frozen in that unnatural grin, its eyes dark, unblinking. I forced myself to look away, to focus on anything else. The sketch, the newspaper, the phone lying on the floor, its screen cracked from the fall. My breath came fast and ragged, my thoughts tumbling over one another, searching for logic, for reason. Someone was messing with me. They had to be. I snatched up the phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed the only person who might be able to make sense of this. Detective Calloway. He was the closest thing I had to a friend in the force. The one who always handled my sketches, who had trusted me on more cases than I deserved. The line rang once, twice, then his voice, groggy and irritated. "Grayson, do you have any idea what time it is?" I glanced at the clock, 3:12 a.m. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's important." A sigh. "It always is. Can it wait until morning?" "Number it?" I hesitated, swallowing hard. How could I even explain this? "It's about a case. A body." That got his attention. His tone sharpened. "What body?" I gripped the phone tighter. "The one in the paper. The unidentified man. I think it's me." Silence. A long, uncomfortable pause. Then a dry chuckle. "Christ, Elliot. You been drinking?" "No," I snapped, frustration rising. Just listen to me. My sketch was in the paper. The one I drew last night. The body they found. It's my face." Another pause, longer this time. "That's not possible," Calloway said slowly. "I know," I whispered. "But it's true. Someone is playing some kind of sick game, and I don't know how, but—" I stopped, my throat closing up. I had just glanced back at the mirror. The reflection was still smiling, and now it was moving. Not mirroring me, not copying, moving on its own. I dropped the phone again. I heard Calloway's voice, distant, muffled, but I couldn't focus on his words, because my reflection had raised its hand, and it was reaching for the glass. My entire body locked up as I watched, the fingers pressed against the surface, palm flat, as if feeling for a way through. My own hands remained at my sides, useless, frozen. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the reflection curled its fingers and knocked. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the inside of the mirror. The world around me spun. My breath came in sharp gasps, my vision tunneling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The knocking stopped, and then, in a voice that was mine, but not mine, my reflection spoke. "You forgot one detail." My knees nearly buckled. I stumbled backward, slamming into the desk so hard that my lamp crashed to the floor, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the moon outside, its pale glow casting long, warped shadows across the walls. I wanted to run, wanted to grab my keys and leave this place, never look back. But my legs wouldn't move. The mirror had gone dark, reflecting nothing but the dim light from the window. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. I needed to get out of here. I needed to find Calloway. I reached for my phone again, fumbling to turn on the screen. But when I lifted it, the call had already ended. The last thing I saw before the screen went black. A single text message. "Don't look in the mirror." The message burned into my vision long after the screen went dark. My breath hitched in my throat, and I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, the air thick with something unseen. A presence, a weight. I needed to get out. Moving on autopilot, I grabbed my jacket and shoved my feet into my sneakers. my pulse hammering so loud it drowned out every other sound. I avoided looking at the mirror as I crossed the room, but I could feel it, a sensation crawling up my spine, as if unseen eyes were following my every move. My fingers fumbled with the lock. It took 3 tries before the deadbolt finally gave way. The door swung open, and I stepped into the hallway, my chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The building was silent. Unnaturally so. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, flickering every few seconds. I forced myself forward, down the narrow corridor, past the peeling wallpaper and the rust-stained carpet. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached the stairs, my phone vibrated again. I stopped, swallowing hard before glancing down. Another message. "Where are you going?" A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My hands trembled as I typed back. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. The response came almost instantly. "Come back. We're not finished." My breath hitched. My head jerked up, scanning the empty hallway, the staircase below, the door to the lobby just beyond. Nothing. No footsteps, no shadows, then another vibration. "Turn around." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to run, to get as far from here as possible. But something, some deep, sick compulsion, made me glance back. The hallway stretched behind me, empty. My apartment door stood ajar, darkness spilling from within like an open wound. And then, movement, a flicker of something in the corner of my vision, my mirror. From where I stood, I could just barely see inside my apartment, just enough to catch a sliver of glass reflecting the dim light from the hallway. And in that reflection, someone stood inside my apartment. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A figure, tall, still, watching me. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. My entire body went rigid, every muscle locking in place. My mouth went dry. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. And even from this distance, I could see it. The eyes, the same wrong, watching eyes from the mirror. I turned and bolted down the stairs. I didn't stop at the lobby. Didn't pause to check if the front desk was empty. My hands slammed into the glass door, shoving it open, spilling me out into the cold night air. I kept running. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, stretching shadows across the pavement. My breath came in sharp gasps, the city blurring around me. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the apartment, away from that thing in the mirror. By the time I stopped, my legs ached, my lungs burning with every breath. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. I was standing outside a bar. Dim neon light buzzed overhead, casting a sickly red glow on the pavement. A few people lingered near the entrance, smoking, laughing, unaware of the sheer terror coursing through my veins. I didn't even think. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and stale beer. Music played from an old jukebox in the corner, the sound tinny and distant. The bartender barely glanced up as I approached the counter, gripping the edge to steady myself. "Whiskey," I muttered. "Neat." The glass hit the counter a few seconds later. I downed it in one gulp, the burn doing nothing to settle my nerves. My hand still shook. I reached for my phone again. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. I scrolled through my contacts, found Calloway's name, and hit dial. It rang and rang. No answer. I cursed under my breath, gripping the phone so tight my fingers ached. I tried again. This time he picked up. "Jesus, Elliot, what the hell is going on?" His voice was sharp, edged with something between concern and frustration. "You hang up on me, then you start sending me weird-ass messages?" I froze. My stomach dropped. "I didn't send you anything," I said slowly. A pause. "Don't screw with me, man." Calloway's voice turned hard. "You texted me 5 minutes ago, said you needed help, that you were being followed." My mouth went dry. "I didn't send that." Another pause. "Where are you?" he asked. I glanced around. "Some bar, Red Moon Lounge, I think." "Stay there," he said. "I'm coming to get you." The call ended. I exhaled, rubbing a hand down my face. My reflection in the bar mirror caught my eye, and I flinched, heart hammering. For a split second, I swore I saw it again. The wrongness in the eyes. The thing that wasn't me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I took another drink, the whiskey dulling the edge of my fear. I just had to wait. Calloway would be here soon. I wasn't alone. I was safe. At least, that's what I told myself, until I felt a breath against my ear. Software slow, and then a whisper. "You're in the wrong place, Elliot." I spun around so fast my glass toppled, whiskey spilling across the counter. No one was there. The spilled whiskey dripped from the counter, pooling on the floor, but I barely noticed. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scanned the bar, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The people around me carried on as if nothing had happened, laughing, drinking, completely unaware of the cold breath I had felt against my ear. I turned back to the mirror behind the bar, half expecting to see that thing again. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed and pale, but it was just me, just my own face. I was losing it. The bartender shot me a look, his hands busy wiping down a glass. "You good, man?" Number I forced a nod. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he went back to his work. I checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Calloway was on his way. All I had to do was sit tight, keep my head down, and not completely fall apart before he got here. I reached for my glass, but my hands were still shaking. The whisper still echoed in my head. "You're in the wrong place, Elliot. A joke? A trick? Maybe some drunk messing with me?" Then why had I felt it? I needed air. Leaving my half-empty glass behind, I pushed away from the counter and headed toward the door. The cold night hit me the second I stepped outside, and I sucked in a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The street was quieter now, the crowds thinning out, the occasional car passing by in a blur of headlights. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I rubbed a hand over my face. Maybe I should call him again. Maybe I should call someone else. But who? Who would believe any of this? Something flickered in my peripheral vision. A movement just down the street. A figure stood beneath a broken street lamp, barely visible in the darkness. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. My pulse spiked. I took a slow step back toward the bar's entrance. The figure didn't react. I couldn't make out any features, but something about the stillness, the unnatural way they stood, made my skin crawl. Another step back. The figure took a step forward. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The street lamp above them flickered, buzzing for a moment before flaring to life. And I saw the face. Mine. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over the curb. My own eyes stared back at me from across the street, but there was no expression, no recognition, just emptiness. The figure moved again, slow, deliberate, toward me. I turned and bolted back inside the bar, nearly slamming into a group of people by the entrance. My chest heaved as I struggled to breathe, every nerve in my body screaming. I spun around. The figure was gone. I backed up against the wall, running a hand through my hair, my fingers trembling. The bartender looked over, unimpressed. "Jesus, man, what the hell is wrong with you?" I ignored him. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I snatched it out, my hands barely steady enough to read the screen. A new message from Calloway. "Almost there. Stay inside." I clutched the phone like a lifeline. He would be here any minute. I just had to wait. The minutes crawled by. I kept my back to the wall, eyes fixed on the entrance. Every time the door swung open, my stomach clenched. Then finally, a familiar figure stepped inside. Calloway. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees nearly buckled. He spotted me instantly, frowning as he made his way over. "You look like shit," he said. I let out a shaky breath. "Yeah, thanks for coming." He pulled out a bar stool and sat down. "All right, tell me everything." I told him. I told him about the sketches, the envelopes, the murders, the message telling me to draw my own face, the newspaper, the voice on the phone, the reflection that wasn't mine, the thing that was following me. I expected him to stop me, to laugh, to tell me I was being ridiculous. But he didn't. He just listened. When I finished, he exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. Christ, Elliot. I know how it sounds, I said quickly, but you have to believe me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped a few buttons, and slid it across the counter toward me. Read that, he said. I frowned and picked up the phone. The screen showed a case file, an autopsy report. My stomach dropped. Victim, unidentified male, approximate age, mid-30s, cause of death, extensive facial trauma. I swallowed hard. This is the body from the paper. Calloway nodded. I kept reading. My pulse pounded in my ears. Victim was found with extensive injuries to the face, as if someone had tried to remove their identity. Fingerprints burned away, teeth removed, eyes missing. I looked up, my mouth dry. Someone erased them. Yeah, Calloway took his phone back. And you're telling me that's you? I opened my mouth, then shut it. I didn't know what to say. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, Elliot, I don't know what kind of shit you're caught up in, but this is something else. That body, whoever he was, someone didn't want him to be identified. They wanted him erased. A chill ran down my spine. Calloway's expression darkened. And now you're telling me someone is trying to erase you? I swallowed. I don't know. He exhaled sharply. Okay, first things first. You're not going back to your apartment. You stay with me until we figure this out. I nodded, too shaken to argue. Come on, he said, standing. Let's get out of here. We made our way toward the door. I hesitated for a brief moment, glancing at the bar mirror one last time. My reflection stood there, watching, waiting. And just before I turned away, it smiled. The cold night air hit me as soon as we stepped outside, but it did nothing to quiet the thudding in my chest. Calloway walked ahead, his shoulders tense, eyes scanning the street as if expecting trouble. I followed, my hands shoved deep into my pockets to keep them from shaking. Cars around the corner, Calloway said, nodding toward the lot at the end of the block. I kept my head down, avoiding the street lamps, avoiding reflections. The image of my grinning reflection in the bar mirror was burned into my mind, twisting inside me like a sickness. Calloway's car was an unmarked black sedan, standard issue for detectives. He unlocked it with a beep, and I reached for the passenger door handle. Then I froze. A piece of paper sat on the windshield, held in place by the wiper blade. Calloway noticed my hesitation and frowned. What? I didn't answer. I stepped forward, my pulse hammering, and pulled the paper free. The handwriting was neat, precise, like it had been written with careful intent. You're already dead. My stomach turned to ice. I swallowed, forcing myself to hand it over to Calloway. He took it, his brows knitting together as he read. That's supposed to be a joke, he muttered. I didn't respond. My mouth was too dry. He crumpled the note and shoved it into his pocket. Get in the car. I obeyed, slipping into the passenger seat, my fingers gripping my knees. Calloway got behind the wheel and started the engine, the low rumble cutting through the eerie silence of the street. As we pulled away, I glanced in the side mirror out of habit, and I saw him, the man with my face, standing beneath the flickering street lamp, motionless, watching the car leave. I turned in my seat, craning my neck to look back. Nothing. Just an empty sidewalk. Calloway noticed. What? I shook my head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing, and I had the sickening feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't done with me. We drove in silence for a while. The city blurred past, its neon lights and shadows blending into something unreal, something out of focus. I tried to ground myself, to breathe, but my thoughts kept spiraling back to the note. You're already dead. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a fact. I swallowed hard. Calloway? Yeah. You believe me, right? A pause. Then he exhaled through his nose, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. I believe something is going on, but I don't believe in ghosts or doppelgangers or whatever the hell you think you're seeing. I clenched my jaw. It's real. Then we'll figure it out. I turned to look at him. What if it's too late? He didn't answer. We pulled up to his apartment building, a low-rise complex with iron bars on the windows, and a parking lot half filled with unmarked police cars. Safe. Secure. At least it should have been. We got out, and Calloway led the way up the stairs to his unit. He unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting me in first. The second I crossed the threshold, something was wrong. The air inside was heavy, like the space had been recently occupied, but left just before we arrived. A faint, metallic scent clung to the air. Calloway noticed it too. He stiffened, one hand going to his holster. "Stay here," he murmured, then moved deeper inside. I watched as he checked the small apartment. Kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, every door, every closet, nothing, and yet the feeling remained. "You good?" Calloway asked, his voice quieter now. I nodded, but I didn't feel good. I felt watched. He motioned for me to sit. I lowered myself onto the couch while he went to the kitchen, rummaging through cabinets. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then something caught my eye. A single piece of paper resting on his coffee table. I knew what it was before I even picked it up. The same thick paper, the same precise handwriting. "You forgot one detail." I shot to my feet, my pulse hammering. "Calloway," I called, my voice sharp. He turned just as I shoved the note toward him. His brows furrowed as he took it, his jaw tightening as he read. "How the hell did this get here?" he muttered. I shook my head. It was waiting for us. The realization settled between us, heavy and suffocating. Someone had been in here. Someone had known we would come here. And worse, someone was still playing this game. I ran a hand through my hair. "I need to see the body." Calloway's eyes snapped to mine. "What?" "The body from the paper. The one that looks like me. I need to see it." He hesitated, then exhaled. "That's not how this works, Elliot. Please." My voice was raw. "If I don't see it, I'll never know if this is real." Calloway studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine." He grabbed his keys and we headed back out. The ride to the morgue was silent. By the time we arrived, it was past midnight. The coroner on duty barely looked up when Calloway flashed his badge, nodding toward the cold storage in the back. We walked down the dimly lit hall, the overhead fluorescents buzzing softly. My pulse pounded in my ears. Calloway led me to one of the metal drawers and hesitated before pulling it open. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. The drawer slid out with a soft metallic scrape. The body lay beneath a white sheet, motionless, anonymous. Calloway peeled the sheet back, and I felt my breath leave my body. It was me. Not just someone who looked like me. It was my face, my features, my scar from when I fell off my bike as a kid, the mole on my jaw. Everything, except the eyes were missing. The mouth was stitched shut, and the skin was pale, waxy, lifeless. I took a step back, my vision blurring at the edges. Calloway was saying something, but I couldn't hear him. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The world tilted. I staggered against the wall, my knees threatening to give out. And then my phone vibrated. I reached for it with numb fingers, barely able to focus on the screen. A new message. "Turn around." My stomach lurched. Slowly I lifted my head, and in the reflective surface of the metal drawers, my dead body smiled at me. I couldn't breathe. The reflection in the metal drawer twisted into something unnatural, something that shouldn't exist. My own dead face, pale, eyes hollowed into nothing, was smiling. The stitches on the corpse's lips didn't move, but the reflection did. I staggered back, my stomach turning inside out. My vision blurred, my hands gripping the cold metal slab for balance. "Elliot!" Calloway's voice cut through the fog. I jerked my head toward him, but he was still looking at the body. He hadn't seen it. He hadn't seen the thing looking at me from the reflection. I forced myself to turn back. The reflection was normal again. The corpse's face was still and expressionless, the stitches holding the lips shut, like nothing had happened. I swallowed bile, wiping a trembling hand over my mouth. Calloway exhaled sharply. "Jesus, Elliot, I see the resemblance, but..." "It's not a resemblance," I said, my voice hoarse. "That's me." He gave me a long, unreadable look. You're standing here, talking to me. You're not on this slab. Then explain it. I gestured at the body, at the flawless details, at every inch of skin that mirrored mine. He shook his head. I can't, but I know someone who might. I barely heard him. My gaze was still locked on my own dead face, waiting for it to move again, to breathe, to blink. It didn't. Calloway grabbed my arm, pulling me back. Come on, we need to go. I didn't argue. My legs felt weak as I followed him out of the morgue, back into the dimly lit hallway. The coroner barely glanced at us as we passed, flipping through paperwork like he hadn't just housed a body that should not exist. As soon as we were outside, I sucked in a sharp breath, trying to calm the tremors running through me. The cold night air did nothing to stop the sweat on my skin. Calloway unlocked the car, and I slid into the passenger seat, still gripping my knees. He pulled out of the lot, his fingers tight around the steering wheel. Who are we going to? I managed to ask. Dr. Alan Whitmore, Calloway said. Criminal psychologist. Deals with cases like this. Cases like what? He didn't answer right away. He turned onto the main road, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. People who see things that shouldn't be there, he finally said. I let that sit for a moment. You think I'm crazy? I think something is happening to you, Calloway said, and I think it's connected to those sketches. We need to figure out how. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past. It should have felt familiar. It didn't. The streetlights cast strange, elongated shadows. The pedestrians walking along the sidewalk seemed too still, too slow. I blinked, and for a second I swore their faces blurred, like an unfinished sketch. I closed my eyes, inhaling through my nose. I was unraveling. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with numb fingers, dreading what I would see. A new message. No number, no name. Just 2 words. Look up. I hesitated. My throat tightened. Calloway glanced over. What is it? I didn't answer. I lifted my gaze to the rearview mirror. A man sat in the back seat. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. He was between us, his face inches from mine. His features, my features, were twisted into something hollow, something not human. His skin was waxy, his smile too wide, his empty eye sockets bleeding darkness. Calloway was still driving, unaware. The man in the mirror grinned, tilting his head, his mouth moving. But the voice came from the speakers of the car. You forgot one detail. The radio hadn't been on, but the voice crackled through the speakers, warped and broken. Calloway finally noticed my expression. Elliot? What? He glanced at the mirror and slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched. I lurched forward, catching myself against the dashboard. A car behind us honked, swerving past. I turned, heart hammering, expecting to see nothing. The back seat was empty. Calloway was breathing hard, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. You saw it, I whispered. He said nothing. Just shoved the car into drive and took off again, faster this time. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. When we pulled up to a narrow brownstone on the quieter side of the city, Calloway finally turned to me. I don't know what the hell is happening, he said, his voice low. But I believe you now. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't done with me yet. Calloway led me up the narrow steps of the brownstone, his movements stiff, tense. He knocked twice. The sound echoed through the quiet street, too sharp in the cold night air. A moment later, the door opened. Dr. Alan Whitmore was older than I expected, mid-50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that studied me as if he already knew what I was going to say. Detective, he greeted, nodding at Calloway before turning to me. And you must be Elliot. I barely nodded. My skin still crawled from what I had seen in the car. I hadn't spoken a word since we arrived, afraid that if I did, I might break apart completely. Whitmore stepped aside, motioning us in. The inside of his home was small but lined with books, stacks of papers, notes scribbled on scattered pages. A single lamp cast a dim glow over the space. It felt claustrophobic, like stepping into someone's mind and realizing it was too full of things that shouldn't be there. Sit, Whitmore said, gesturing toward an old leather chair. I sat. The material was cold against my skin. Calloway remained standing, arms crossed. Whitmore settled across from me, folding his hands in his lap. Tell me what's happening. I told him. Everything. From the first anonymous envelope to the moment in the morgue, when my own dead body had smiled at me. Calloway remained silent throughout, though I could feel his presence beside me like an anchor, keeping me from floating too far into the insanity of it all. When I finished, Whitmore was quiet for a long time. His fingers tapped absently against the armrest. Then he sighed. Elliot, he said carefully, when was the last time you remember feeling certain that you were real? I frowned. What kind of question is that? A necessary one. I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable. I don't know. A week ago. Before this started? And before that? I hesitated. A flicker of something deep in my brain. Something I had pushed aside without realizing it. A strange sense of disconnection, of fading in and out of my own life. Memories that felt like sketches instead of real moments. Whitmore leaned forward. Elliot, I don't think you exist the way you believe you do. The room tilted. My breath stilled. Calloway exhaled sharply. What the hell does that mean? Whitmore looked at me, his eyes unreadable. You said you've been drawing strangers before they turn up dead. You said the last request was to draw yourself. I nodded slowly. What if, he said, voice steady, that wasn't a request? What if it was a final confirmation? My pulse pounded in my ears. Confirmation of what? Whitmore hesitated. Then he reached for a stack of papers on the table beside him, flipping through them until he found what he wanted. He handed it to me. It was a police report. I scanned the page, confusion tightening my throat. The name at the top, my name. The details blurred as I tried to make sense of them. Then I reached the date. My blood turned to ice. The report was from 6 months ago. My own death. No, I whispered. This isn't right. I just saw my body in the morgue tonight. How could this? Because, Whitmore said softly, you've been dead for months, Elliot. The room around me felt too small, too tight. The walls pressed in, the floor unsteady beneath me. Calloway grabbed the paper from my hands, his expression darkening as he read. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered. I've known Elliot for years. We've worked cases together. He's not... He stopped. His face paled. I swallowed hard. Calloway? His hand tightened around the paper. Your number, he said, voice barely above a whisper. In my phone. I didn't understand. He looked at me, and there was something in his expression I had never seen before. Fear. Elliot, I don't have your number saved. The words crashed into me like a freight train. I shook my head. Number that's not possible. We've talked on the phone a dozen times. Calloway didn't respond. He was scrolling through his call history, his fingers moving too fast. His face grew tighter with every second. He turned the screen toward me. Every call I had made to him, unknown number, every single one. My stomach lurched. Number? No, that's not... Whitmore's voice was quiet. Elliot, when was the last time you actually saw your reflection blink? The question sent something jagged through my chest. I tried to remember, tried to think back to a single moment in the past few weeks where I had caught myself blinking in a mirror. I couldn't. Cold terror settled deep in my bones. I pushed myself out of the chair, backing away from them, from the room, from the truth that was sinking into me like a slow-moving horror. No, I whispered. I'm here. I'm talking to you. Then I caught my reflection in the window, and it wasn't moving. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. The reflection stood there perfectly still, its eyes locked onto mine. Then with slow, deliberate movement, it raised a hand, but I didn't. My body remained frozen in place, but the thing in the reflection lifted its fingers, touching the glass as if pressing against some invisible barrier. And then it whispered, not aloud, not in sound, but directly into my mind. You were never supposed to remember. Darkness rushed in, the world cracked, and everything disappeared. When Calloway blinked, Elliot was gone. The chair sat empty, the air heavy with something unexplainable. Whitmore exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple as if he had seen this happen before. Calloway turned in a slow circle, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. Where the hell did he go? Whitmore sighed. He was never really here. The detective clenched his fists. That's not possible. He was sitting there, talking, breathing, thinking, Whitmore corrected, but not living. Calloway's head spun. He looked down at his phone, scrolling through his messages, the ones from Elliot. Gone. Every call, every text, as if they had never existed. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The game of faces, he murmured. Calloway snapped his head up. What? Whitmore nodded toward the window. That's what they used to call it. A myth, a folktale. People who see their own death before it happens. But the trick is, once they've drawn the face, he glanced at the empty chair. They can never go back. Calloway's mouth was dry. He reached for his gun without thinking, as if he could shoot the fear out of his bones. Then his phone vibrated. One new message. Unknown number. Look in the mirror.